I am so disappointed with my life right now. Hi weaving friends, I've made a really silly error, and the only way I figured out to console myself is to make a YouTube video so that I can help other people who do something silly like I've done today. What I've done is I've started weaving this project, and I wove a sample of this project with the same yarns before I began on the whole thing, because I obviously wanted to test it and know that it would turn out really well. And it did turn out just very well. And so I was happy to go on with the actual project. So I started weaving, and can you notice here, even though, you know, it looks slightly cool the way it is with all of these gaps, I didn't actually intend for these gaps to be in the piece. So I'm weaving along and I'm going, why are there gaps in the piece? Like every time I advance the warp, these gaps appear when they rub on the front bar. That didn't happen with my sample. Pondering and pondering. Sometimes it takes me a little while to get it, you know, it's late in the afternoon. And then I figured out, I had a look at my heddle size and it says 7.5, and guess what? It's supposed to say 12.5. So that is why I have these gaps, because my set is too open, and that's why it's behaving differently now to how it behaved before. You might be wondering why it's flopping about on the loom as well. That's just because I wound it back and I untied it from the front apron rod. That was my first step, and I'm going to fix this. So there are a few options. If this happened to you and you feel like it's not working at the set that you've got, and mine is definitely not working at the set that I've got, because I don't want all of these gaps. I don't want my weaving moving about. It's just so easy to slip it about, you see, because the set is so open. And yeah, like I said, kind of a cool effect, but not what I was intending. So I'm using tencel as well, which doesn't help because it's kind of slippery yarn. Okay, so what are your options if this happens to you? You want to change your heddles to a different size. You can do that. But are you going to cut off the weaving that you've done and then retie? Well, that depends on whether you have enough warp. If your entire warp, if you say you warped a little bit extra at the beginning, just in case, or because you wanted to sample, if you have the extra warp and you don't mind not using this yarn that you've already used here, then you could wind it forward, give yourself some space so that it's still threaded through the heddle, and then you could cut it and change your heddle and retie that way. Or you could do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to attempt to undo this weaving because I want to salvage the warp yarn, because I really do need this extra length. I've already hem stitched at the start, and so my first thing to do is get rid of that hem stitch so that I can then start to unravel some of this weft yarn. So when you're doing this, you can cut your hem stitch out. Just make sure you don't cut your actual warp threads. So that's the first thing to do, because that hem stitch that I've already done is just going to hold everything in place and I won't be able to do any unraveling. I could also start unraveling from the top, but I'm still going to need this hem stitch to be gone anyway. And of course, if you are that patient, you can leave your weaving, your warp tied up instead of undoing it like I did, and you can unweave. So weave backwards, do the exact opposite of what you did to get this much weaving. I chose not to do that because I'm using fine yarns here. I had already been weaving for a bit and I just didn't really feel like unweaving all of that. All right. So if you want to start unraveling from the top, you can do that by just pulling pulling the weft thread out. So that's one row pulled out, and then pull from the other side. It's going to be a bit tedious. Probably not as tedious as unweaving though. And look, there are times that I will unweave. It's just, like I said, I've spent a bit of time on this project already, and I'm feeling a bit tired this afternoon and not really feeling like unweaving. So what I'd rather do is just pull out what I can and do it that way. So I still want to get my little hem stitches out of my way, but I can cut that first weft thread and start removing that. Doing this, it's not going to damage your warp threads. You might need to be a little bit careful. You can see some of mine are a bit tangly. So as long as you're confident that you can deal with that, you can just pull it out. And because I'm using tencel, it slips out of place pretty easily. So just carrying on that way. It'll bunch up a bit as you're pulling it. But that's okay, it goes out again just fine. If you're using something, maybe something a bit more fluffy, like a wool, it is possible that doing this, pulling this thread out in this manner, it may make your warp threads fluffier than they were before. Just something to keep in mind. The warp will still be usable as long as, you know, the threads aren't so fluffy that they're deteriorating and breaking or anything like that. All right, so as you do this, you can imagine that once I've pulled out a certain amount, it's going to start to tangle in itself if I just leave it. So I can pull it out to a certain point, and I can feel now that it's starting to want to tangle. I'll just pull it back out. So once you feel your thread is long enough, you can cut it, and then just what I would do is just use my fingers to wind it into a really quick little coil, and then you've got reusable bits of yarn. Now if you don't want to have tiny bits of yarn like that, then probably the unweaving method is the way to go for you. So I'm going to keep doing this, friends. It's going to take me a little while, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to switch the heddles. All right, I've finally got all of that weft yarn out. The warp is a little bit messy. That is because of some of the yarn that I'm using. So it does look messier than usual, but that's okay. I've sort of finger combed it out and it is all right. And if I've got any little spots like that, I'll just continue to comb them out and then they'll be fine. So the first thing I'm going to do is I will put this heddle, this is the 7.5 dent heddle that I don't want. I'm going to hold on to the warp and just pop that on the back heddle block, which is very handy for this sort of thing. And then hello 12.5 dent, you're a little bit late to the party, but better late than never. Put that on the front block, and then I've got my warp and I can grab my threading hook, and I'm going to look around the middle. So on the back I've got the middle marked out, and I'm going to grab, hang on, let's see, I'm going to grab the one that's to the left of the hole, and I will lift that out and over, and I can pop my heddle back up and find the center of this one, which on the Ashford heddles is where the dot is. So I can go to the hole that is closest to the center. Here. and then I'm going to thread that through. And then I'm just going to go methodically through these threads. So I'll go to the next one that's to the left. It doesn't matter if you go to the left or right. And then just methodically going through and threading slot, then hole, then slot, then hole, alternating. Just make sure that you're always from the back heddle. Once you've got your next thread, make sure that you're taking it out from behind that heddle and then coming in over the top, so that while you're threading the front heddle, you're unthreading the back heddle. Otherwise, you're not going to have a way of removing that afterwards. So I'm going to carry on taking my threads out and rethreading them in the front, and then I'll come back and see you for the final step. Okay, so my front heddle, the correct one that I actually want to use, is all threaded up, and I've put all of the threads into little slip knot bunches to keep them secure for the next part of the process. It's also just better to slip knot because just in case your heddle knocks out of place, it can actually happen quite easily. And so now that's all threaded up and ready. This is the heddle that I don't want, and so I'm just going to flip it back out of that heddle block, and then I can just take it down and out, and then it is gone. And I'm ready with my correct heddle to start tying my bunches back onto the apron rod. Now, a couple of things, one thing in particular that I don't think I mentioned is when you change the set like I've just done, so from 7.5 to 12.5, obviously the 12.5 dent heddle allows for a much closer set, brings all the threads closer together, right? So when I actually warped, I warped with my 7.5 dent heddle, and so it was spaced, the warp was spaced at the back beam by that particular heddle. So now that I have changed the heddle to the smaller one, you can probably see already at the front that the width is quite reduced from how it is at the back from the original wind on. And that's fine, but it's just going to mean that your object now would be much narrower than it was at the beginning. That could be an issue for you for your particular project, so it's something to bear in mind when you do this. So I'll start knotting my threads back onto the front apron rod, and very soon I will be up and weaving again.